My best friend asked to sleep in my room. I didn't expect this. The rain hammered against my apartment windows as I slouched on my worn leather couch, rewatching the same episode of The Office for probably the 100th time. It was a Friday night and I had absolutely nowhere to be. My name is Daniel, I'm 28 years old and I work as a junior architect at a mid-sized firm downtown. My life wasn't bad, it was just ordinary, predictable, safe. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Marcus, hey man, you home? I smiled. Marcus was my best friend. We'd met in college 10 years ago. Can you believe it's been a decade? When we were randomly assigned as roommates in the freshman dorms. He was loud, chaotic, and immediately annoying. I was quiet, organized, and immediately determined to request a room change. Somehow, by the end of that first semester, we'd become inseparable. Me, yeah, why, what's up? Marcus, can I come over? Kind of a rough day. That was all the context I needed. Marcus didn't really ask for much. He was one of those guys who powered through life with this infectious optimism that made even his darkest days look like minor inconveniences. So when he texted that something was rough, I knew it was legitimately serious. Me, of course, man, you hungry? I can order Thai. Marcus, you're the best, thanks. I immediately started straightening up. Not because Marcus cared about clutter, he'd lived in his car longer than he'd lived in any actual apartment, but because it made me feel like I was doing something useful. I was a fixer by nature. When someone I cared about had a problem, I needed to solve it. 30 minutes later, Marcus appeared at my door soaked through with rain, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, wearing the kind of expression I'd learned to recognize over the years. It was the everything's falling apart but I'm pretending it's fine expression. I'd seen it before, usually around mid-semester in college or during particularly rough weeks at work. He was tall, taller than my 6-foot frame by a couple inches, with the kind of effortless athletic build that came from actually using his body instead of sitting at a desk like I did. His brown eyes were darker than usual, and his jaw was set in that determined way that meant he was working hard to keep it together. You look like a drowned rat, I said, pulling him inside. Feel like one too, he replied, managing a weak smile. We'd gone through the ritual 1,000 times. I grabbed him a towel from the bathroom, he stripped off his jacket and shoes and I turned up the heat because he always seemed to run cold. I ordered our usual Thai order, pad Thai for him, green curry for me, and we settled onto the couch. So, I said, not looking directly at him because I knew that sometimes people find it easier to talk when you're not staring them down. What happened? Marcus was quiet for a moment. He stared at his hands, at the way water droplets were still sliding off his dark hair and onto his jeans. I think I got fired. My head snapped around. What? Why? I thought your job at the marketing firm was going well. It was, he said quietly, or I thought it was, but apparently I wasn't fitting the company culture. That's what Mr. Davidson said anyway. That's bullshit, I said immediately. It is, Marcus agreed, but it's also my third job in 2 years, so maybe I'm the common denominator in this equation. I wanted to argue with that logic, but I also knew Marcus well enough to know that he was being hard on himself right now. Marcus had this pattern: he'd get a job, work hard, be brilliant at it, and then something would happen that would make him feel like he didn't belong. Usually, it had something to do with the fact that he was constantly hiding a massive part of himself. Marcus was gay. Not that I knew this from him telling me directly. We'd never actually had that conversation. But I'd known for years, probably since that first year of college when I'd caught him looking at guys the same way other guys looked at women. I'd watched him go through a series of girlfriends over the years, each one lasting just long enough to feel convincing but not long enough to require him to explain too much. I'd seen the relief that washed over his face when he was alone, the way he seemed to exist more fully when he was just being himself. And honestly, that was why I knew these job losses affected him so deeply, because I was pretty sure they weren't really about his job performance. You know what you need, I said, standing up. You need to not think about this for a night. You need Thai food, bad television, and me telling you that you're going to figure this out because you always do. A real smile crossed his face then. How did we end up here? He asked. I mean, you remember when you tried to move out after the first week of freshman year. I laughed. You threatened to report me to the RAW. You were writing passive-aggressive post-it notes about my side of the room being a biological hazard. It was. It was, he agreed, but somehow you didn't move out, and somehow 10 years later here we are. Best decision I never consciously made, I said, and I meant it. We spent that night exactly as I'd promised. The Thai food arrived, we put on every silly comedy special we could find, and I watched as Marcus gradually relaxed. By midnight, he was laughing again, that genuine laugh that came from his whole body, and I felt like I'd accomplished something important. "Hey Dan," he said as the night was winding down and we were both getting that fuzzy, tired feeling. "Yes. Thanks for always being here for all of this." He gestured vaguely around the apartment. "I know I'm not always easy to be around." "You're the easiest person I know to be around," I said honestly. "You're my best friend, Marcus, of course I'm here for you." He smiled, but something flickered across his face then, something I couldn't quite read. Later, I would remember that moment and wonder if I'd missed something important. "I should crash here tonight," he said. "If that's cool, I don't really want to go home right now." "My bed's yours," I said immediately. "I'll take the couch." "Man, you always do that." "Because you need rest, and you sleep better in a bed than on a couch." "Yeah, well, you need sleep too. How about we share the bed? It's not like we haven't done that before." He was right. During college, when the dorms were loud and chaotic, we'd often crashed in the same bed just to get some peace and quiet. It wasn't weird or uncomfortable then, and it wouldn't be now. We were friends. "Sure," I said, "why not?" That night, as I lay in bed next to Marcus, listening to him breathe as he fell asleep, I didn't know that I was about to step across a line I couldn't come back from. I didn't know that one innocent sleepover would change everything between us. I didn't know that in the darkness of my bedroom, with the rain still pattering against the windows, my life was about to become much more complicated than it had ever been. If I had known, would I have done anything differently? I'd like to say I'm not sure, but honestly, probably not. For the next 3 weeks, Marcus essentially moved into my apartment. He'd show up after work initially, then after getting fired, just permanently. His apartment lease was up at the end of the month anyway, he reasoned, so why pay for it when he could save money? I didn't argue. I was glad to have him there. With Marcus around, my apartment felt less like a place I lived and more like a home. My routine shifted to accommodate him. We'd wake up together, I'd make coffee while he showered, then we'd sit on my tiny balcony and just exist for a while before the day demanded anything of us. He'd spend his days job hunting, going to interviews, or working on freelance projects. I'd go to the firm, pretend to care about client presentations and building codes, then come home to find him there. It should have been awkward, two adult men in their late 20s sharing a one-bedroom apartment, but it wasn't. We'd developed a rhythm over the years, even if it had mostly existed in college. We knew how to be around each other in silence. We knew which foods belonged to whom. We knew which bathroom habits annoyed the other person and adjusted accordingly. We also continued to share the bed. It wasn't a conscious decision, really. That first night after he arrived, we'd gotten ready for bed together, and when it came time to sleep, I just assumed he'd sleep next to me rather than on the couch. And the second night, it was easier to repeat it than to change it. By the third week, it was so normal that I rarely even thought about it anymore. Except I did think about it, more than I wanted to admit. The problem was this: I had slowly begun to realize, over the course of my 20s, that I might be interested in men. Not exclusively, but it was definitely something I was processing. I'd had 2 serious relationships with women and one brief, confusing thing with my college debate partner that we'd never spoken about again. But mostly I kept these thoughts to myself. I wasn't sure what they meant. I wasn't sure what I wanted. I wasn't sure about a lot of things. And then Marcus had shown up at my door in the rain, soaked through and broken, and suddenly I had a lot fewer things I was unsure about. But Marcus didn't know that about me. As far as he knew, I was straight. As far as anyone knew, I was straight. And I intended to keep it that way, at least until I figured out what these feelings meant. The problem was that it's hard to figure out what your feelings mean when the person you're attracted to is sleeping 3 inches away from you every single night. I remember one morning in particular. It was a Tuesday, I think, or maybe a Wednesday. The days were starting to blur together. I woke up to find that Marcus had rolled toward me in his sleep and his arm was draped across my chest. His forehead was almost touching mine. In the soft morning light that filtered through my curtains, he looked peaceful in a way I rarely saw him awake. There was a line between his eyebrows just barely visible from years of worrying about things, about fitting in, about finding his place, about, I didn't know, but seeing it, even in sleep, made me want to smooth it away. I very carefully extracted myself from the bed and went to make coffee, because staying there felt dangerous in a way I couldn't quite articulate. This became a pattern. Wake up, realize Marcus was too close, extract myself, make coffee, don't think about it. I was very good at not thinking about it. But then one night, about a week into his stay, everything became much harder to ignore. We'd been watching a movie, some romantic comedy that Marcus had insisted on. Normally, I paid attention to these kinds of things we watched, but that night I was finding it impossible to focus. Marcus had this habit of getting comfortable while watching movies, and on this particular night he was sprawled against me, his back against my side, his head tilted back so that it was resting on my shoulder. I was acutely aware of every point of contact between us, the warmth of his body against mine, the way his breathing synced with mine after a while, the way the scent of my own shampoo, which he'd borrowed because he'd forgotten his, mixed with something distinctly Marcus. "You're tense," he said without looking away from the screen. "I'm not," I lied. "You are, your arm is like steel." He reached up and poked my bicep to emphasize his point. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, just tired." He was quiet for a moment, then he shifted his position so that he was sitting up slightly, his body still close to mine but not quite touching in the same way. "Is this okay?" he asked, and I could hear the genuine concern in his voice. "Like, is it weird having me here all the time? You can tell me, you don't have to say yes just to be nice." And suddenly I was confronted with a choice. I could tell him the truth, that it wasn't weird in the way he meant, but it was weird in an entirely different way that I couldn't begin to explain. Or I could lie and maintain the status quo. I chose the lie, I chose the safety of it. "No man, it's perfect," I said. "I like having you here, seriously, you know I'm not good with being alone." He seemed satisfied with that answer. He repositioned himself and we went back to watching the movie, but something had shifted between us, something subtle but real. I'd made a choice and I was going to have to live with it. 2 months into Marcus's stay with me, reality started to intrude on our little bubble. "I got a job," he announced one evening as I was making dinner. He sounded happy and I should have been purely thrilled for him, but underneath that happiness there was something else, something that sounded like goodbye. "That's amazing," I said, and I meant it, but I was already cataloging what this meant. A job meant he'd get back on his feet. Getting back on his feet meant he'd move out. Moving out meant our current situation would end. "It's at a tech startup downtown," he continued, helping me chop vegetables with the kind of comfort that came from doing this 100 times. "Pretty good salary, benefits, the whole package. It's marketing, which is what I actually want to do, not just survive doing." "I'm really happy for you," I said, and meant that too. "When do you start?" 2 weeks, and he paused. "I'm going to move out as soon as I have my first paycheck. I don't want to impose anymore." There it was, the ending I'd been expecting and dreading in equal measure. "You're not imposing," I said automatically. "I'm kind of imposing," he countered. "I've been here for 2 months, you've been sleeping on the couch half the time." "I haven't." "Yes, you have. I see you, Dan. I see you getting up at 3 in the morning and going to the couch because you think I don't notice, or because you're trying not to make me feel like I'm cramping your style or whatever." He set down the knife and looked at me seriously. "You're a good friend, the best friend, and that's exactly why I need to go. I can't keep freeloading off your space just because it's comfortable." "It's not about comfort," I said, more forcefully than I intended. "It's about us being here for each other." "I know," he said quietly, "and I am grateful, genuinely, but I've got to figure my life out on my own, you know that." I did know that. Marcus had always been someone who needed to prove things to himself. He needed to know that he could stand on his own 2 feet, that he could build his own life without relying on anyone else. In a lot of ways, it was admirable. In other ways, it was incredibly frustrating because it meant I couldn't keep him in the safe bubble of my apartment forever. We finished making dinner in relative silence, and the elephant in the room grew larger and larger. It sat on my kitchen counter, it followed us to the couch, it crowded into bed with us that night. And I lay awake while Marcus slept, acutely aware that I was running out of time. The 2 weeks passed faster than any 2 weeks had ever passed in my life. Suddenly, Marcus was moving day away from moving out, and I hadn't done anything to address what was happening between us. Because something was happening. Even if we weren't acknowledging it explicitly, it existed in the space between us. It existed in the way Marcus had started looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. It existed in the way he'd hold my hand just a moment too long when we were getting up from the couch. It existed in the way he'd lean against me more often, seek out my touch more frequently, as if he was trying to memorize the feeling of it before it was gone. And I was doing the same thing, I realized. I was cataloging the way the light caught in his hair. I was memorizing the way he laughed at stupid jokes I made. I was holding on to moments like they might disappear. Because they were going to disappear. The night before he was supposed to move out, he came home with boxes, actual boxes. They sat in our living room like a physical manifestation of the end of something. "My new place isn't much," he said, and I could hear the nervousness in his voice. "But it's a start. I'm going to paint the walls this crazy shade of teal that my sister says is going to ruin the deposit, but I don't care. I want it to feel like me, you know." "That sounds great," I said, and I was genuinely trying to be happy for him. I was trying. "You'll come over, right, once I get it set up? I don't want this to be the end of us hanging out all the time. I just need to figure some stuff out on my own." There it was again, the implication that he needed to figure something out. And I was pretty sure I knew what that something was because I was trying to figure it out too. The difference was that I was going to lose the best friend I'd ever had while I was in the process of figuring it out. That night, as we got ready for bed, probably the last time we'd get ready for bed together in my apartment, I thought Marcus asked me a question that changed everything. "Can we just stay up?" he asked. "I know it's late and you have work tomorrow, but I don't want to sleep yet. I don't want tonight to be over." So we didn't sleep. We stayed up and we talked. We talked about everything and nothing. We talked about the first time we met and how I'd seriously considered transferring schools because I thought my roommate was the worst person alive. We talked about that time we went on a road trip and got lost in Nevada and had to sleep in the car. We talked about his new job and his crazy plans for his new apartment and the fact that he still hadn't figured out what the hell he wanted to do with his life. But we didn't talk about the thing that was most important. We didn't talk about the way his hand found mine at 3 in the morning. We didn't talk about the fact that he didn't let go. "Dan," he said quietly around 4 in the morning, the sky was just starting to lighten that weird gray-blue color it gets right before sunrise. "I need to tell you something." My heart started pounding. This was it. This was the moment where everything was going to change. "I'm gay," he said, and his voice was so small, so uncertain that it broke my heart. "I should have told you years ago, and I know you probably figured it out because you're basically a mind reader, but I needed to say it out loud. I'm gay and I've been gay and I'm sorry for not telling you before now." I wanted to laugh or cry or scream. I wanted to grab him and kiss him until neither of us could breathe. I wanted to tell him that I knew that I'd always known that it didn't matter. I wanted to tell him what I'd figured out about myself during his stay with me. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I said, "I know and I love you, that hasn't changed." It wasn't the response he wanted, I could tell, but it was the only one I could manage because if I said anything more, I wouldn't be able to stop myself from saying everything. He nodded slowly and he squeezed my hand a little tighter, and then the moment passed because the sun fully rose and his phone went off with an alarm. His new place was waiting for him. His new life was waiting for him, and I was going to let him walk out of my apartment and into it because that's what best friends did. They let each other go even when it broke them. Marcus moved out on a Saturday morning. His sister showed up with a truck and they filled it with boxes that represented his 2 months of residence in my home. I helped them load up, making jokes and acting like this wasn't killing me inside. "You're going to come by next weekend, right?" he asked as we loaded the last box. "I'll be done unpacking. I'll make something terrible for dinner." "Absolutely," I lied. I had no intention of going to his place. I didn't trust myself around him now that I'd admitted what I was feeling, even if only to myself. He pulled me into a hug and it lasted just a moment too long. I was acutely aware of the presence of his sister standing nearby, and I carefully disconnected from him before anything in my body could betray how I felt. "Thanks for everything," he said. "Seriously, I don't know what I would have done without you." "That's what best friends are for," I replied. And then they were gone. His sister honked the horn as they pulled away from my building, and I stood on the curb waving until they turned the corner and I couldn't see them anymore. My apartment felt impossibly empty when I went back inside, not just because his things were gone but because the whole energy of the place had shifted. Without Marcus, it was just a collection of rooms again. Without Marcus, there was no home. I lasted exactly 3 days before I started constructing elaborate excuses for why I couldn't see him. My work was busy, I was tired, I was coming down with something. The excuses were weak and I knew Marcus could see through them, but he was kind enough to accept them anyway. This went on for 2 weeks, and then 3, and then a month. During this time, I went back to my life before Marcus had arrived. I went to work, I came home, I watched television, I went to bed. It was the same routine I'd had before, and it felt like living in a parallel dimension where everything was slightly wrong. Where the colors were muted and the sounds were distant and I existed but didn't really live. My coworkers noticed something was off. "You seem down," my colleague Jessica said one afternoon. "Is everything okay?" "Fine," I lied, "just tired." But I wasn't tired. I was heartbroken, and I didn't know how to explain that to someone without explaining the whole story, which I couldn't do. I spent a lot of time during this period analyzing what had happened. I replayed every moment with Marcus through the lens of what I now understood about myself. I wondered if I'd been unfair to him somehow, if I'd led him on by accepting his touch without reciprocating the feelings behind it. I wondered if he knew, if somehow he'd sensed what I was trying so desperately not to feel. And I wondered if he felt the same way, or if I'd completely imagined the electricity between us. The wondering was the worst part. My carefully constructed wall of avoidance came crashing down on a Wednesday evening. I was at the grocery store minding my own business, trying to decide between 2 brands of frozen pasta when I literally ran into someone. Their cart collided with mine and someone's oranges rolled across the floor. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I started to say, and then I looked up and my heart stopped. It wasn't Marcus, it was his sister Sophia. We'd met a few times during his stay with me and she'd been nothing but kind. She had the same dark hair as Marcus but warmer eyes, and she was looking at me with an expression of deep concern. "Daniel, oh my God, hi, how are you? I haven't seen you in forever. Marcus keeps saying he invited you over and you keep flacking, and I told him you were probably just busy, but..." She paused, studying my face. "Are you okay? You look terrible." "I'm fine," I said automatically. "You look like you haven't slept in a week. Are you sick?" "No, just work stuff, you know how it is." Sophia didn't look convinced, but she seemed to accept the answer. "Well, you should come over soon. Marcus talks about you constantly, like more constantly than is probably healthy for either of you. He misses his best friend." The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. "I will," I promised, "just some stuff I'm dealing with right now." "Is it something Marcus did?" she asked suddenly. "Because if he did something, you should just tell him. He's an idiot sometimes, but he's a good person. I'm sure whatever it is, you guys can work it out." "No, he didn't do anything," I said quietly. "It's just me, some personal stuff." She studied me for another moment and I could see the gears turning in her head. "You know what?" she said. "I'm going to tell you something, and you're probably not going to want to hear it, but I'm going to tell you anyway." "Okay. My brother is in love with you." The world tilted on its axis. I started to say, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish." He's never going to say it out loud because Marcus is emotionally constipated and has been since high school. But he's been in love with you for years. I'm like 90% sure. And you clearly feel the same way because you're standing here looking like your entire world is ending just because you ran into me. "Sophia, you're both idiots," she continued. "You're both too scared to actually talk about it, so you're just going to keep doing this thing where you avoid each other and pretend everything is fine. But everything is not fine, and it's not going to be fine until one of you is brave enough to actually say something." I didn't know what to say. I literally couldn't form words. "Think about it," she said, and then she patted my arm and resumed her shopping, leaving me standing there with my frozen pasta and my entire understanding of the situation now reframed. Marcus was in love with me. It shouldn't have been a shock. Deep down, I think I'd known it, but having someone else say it out loud made it real in a way that my own thoughts couldn't quite manage. It made it something that demanded to be addressed. I went to Marcus's apartment that night. I didn't call first, I didn't text. I just got in my car and drove to the address he'd given me all those weeks ago, and when I knocked on the door, I was terrified in a way I'd never been before. He answered after about 30 seconds, and he was clearly surprised to see me. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and sweatpants, and his hair was slightly disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked beautiful and familiar and like a stranger all at once. "Hey," he said cautiously, "this is unexpected, come in." His apartment was small, smaller than mine, but it was very much him. The walls were indeed that crazy shade of teal he'd mentioned, and there were photos pinned up everywhere, including several of us from over the years. He'd made this place a home already in the way that Marcus had a talent for doing. I ran into Sophia, I said without preamble. Something in his face shifted. Oh, what did she say? That you're in love with me. For a moment, Marcus didn't say anything. He just looked at me with an expression that was equal parts fear and resignation. That woman is going to be the death of me, he finally said. I specifically told her not to. Is she right? I interrupted. Is she right, Marcus? He was quiet for so long that I started to think he wasn't going to answer, and then, yes. The word hung between us, heavy with meaning. How long? I asked. College, he said, that first semester. You were so annoyed with me and I was so determined to change your mind, and somewhere in the process of trying to be the person you wanted as a roommate, I fell in love with you. He laughed bitterly. I've been in love with you for 10 years, Danny. 10 years of watching you date women, of pretending to be happy for you, of lying about who I was because I was too scared to face the fact that you'd never feel the same way. My heart was breaking and simultaneously being put back together. That's not, I started to say. Let me finish, he said, holding up a hand. I need to say this. I moved into your apartment because I was falling apart and I was trying to pretend that it was just a temporary thing. But the truth is I was willing to pretend it was temporary forever, just as long as I got to stay. I was willing to be your best friend and ignore everything I actually wanted, because having you in my life in any way was better than having you in no way at all. Tears were streaming down his face now, and I realized my face was wet too. When I told you I was gay, he continued, I was trying to give myself permission to feel this. I was trying to make it real enough that maybe one day I'd be brave enough to actually say what I meant to say. But then you didn't respond the way I hoped and I got scared again, so I moved out. I thought if I could just put some distance between us, maybe I could figure out how to stop loving you. Has it worked? I asked quietly. Not even a little bit, he said, and then he laughed through his tears. Every day I don't see you is like the worst day, and every day I do see you is painful in a completely different way. So no, I've come to the realization that I'm just going to be in love with you forever, and I'm going to have to figure out how to be okay with that. I was moving before I'd fully decided to move. I crossed the distance between us and I reached up and I pulled his face down to mine. I kissed him. It was awkward and a little wet because we were both crying and his nose bumped into mine slightly and it was absolutely perfect. It was the first kiss I'd ever had that felt like coming home, like every other kiss I'd ever had in my life had just been practice for this one. When we finally pulled apart, Marcus looked at me with an expression of confused hope. What was that? He asked breathlessly. That was me being brave, I said. Or at least, attempting to be brave. Because I spent the last month trying to convince myself that I wasn't in love with you, that what I was feeling was just, I don't know, the product of proximity and comfort and the fact that you're the only person who's ever really understood me. But, he prompted. But I can't pretend anymore, I said. I don't want to pretend anymore. I'm in love with you, Marcus. I think I've been in love with you for longer than I even realized. And I don't have all the answers about what that means for us or how we make this work or any of that, but I know that I don't want to not see you anymore. I know that I don't want to keep lying about how I feel. I know that I want to try this with you properly this time. Marcus kissed me again, and this time it was less awkward. This time he knew what he was doing and I followed his lead. His hands found my face and mine found his waist, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like I'd been waiting my whole life for this. I love you, he said against my lips. I'm in love with you, and I promise I'm never going to stop reminding you of that in case you ever doubt it again. I love you too, I said. I'm still terrified, but I love you. Being terrified is probably normal, he said, pulling back just enough to look at me. What are we terrified of? Everything, I said. What people will think, whether we actually know how to do this, whether we're going to ruin the best friendship either of us has ever had, take your pick. Fair, he said. Okay, so here's what I think. I think we're going to tell people we care about, slowly, at our own pace. I think we're going to figure this out as we go because that's what we've always done anyway. And I think worst case scenario, if we somehow screw this up, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about it because communication is apparently now our thing. Okay. Okay, I agreed. Also, I'm moving back in with you. He laughed. I only have one bedroom. I'm aware that's kind of the point. We literally just established that you were living here and actively avoiding me for a month. That was before I admitted I'm in love with you, I said. Now I'm planning to marry you, so I think moving back in is a reasonable next step. You're planning to marry me? He raised an eyebrow. We literally just got together. Is that not the plan? I asked innocently. Sophia said you were in love with me. I thought that came with an implicit promise ring. There's no implicit promise ring. Well, there should be. I'm setting the precedent. I'm going to marry you, Marcus, probably not immediately, but it's definitely in the plan. He was grinning now, that real grin that transformed his whole face. Okay, he said, I'm holding you to that. Good, I said, I wouldn't want it any other way. That night I called in sick to work the next day, and the day after that. I didn't go back to my apartment for 3 weeks. Instead, I existed in this little bubble with Marcus where nothing else mattered except us and what we were building together. We didn't have it figured out, we were probably doing a lot of things wrong, but we were doing it together. The first hurdle came when Marcus's mother called. Sophia had apparently decided to tell her parents that Marcus was gay despite Marcus's protests that he wasn't ready, and his mother, who'd been shocked but ultimately supportive, wanted to have lunch with us, both of us, together, to talk about what this meant for the family. I was terrified, Marcus was terrified, but we showed up anyway because running away from things wasn't who we were anymore. Lunch was at a small Italian place that Marcus's family had been going to for years. His mother, Elena, was a warm woman with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes. She hugged both of us when we arrived, and I could feel Marcus relax slightly. So, Elena said after we'd ordered and made some small talk, Sophia tells me you two are together, like romantically. Yes, Marcus said, taking my hand under the table. I squeezed it. Is that something you have a problem with? I don't have a problem with it, Elena said slowly. But I need to understand it. You've been best friends for 10 years, you live together. Is this something that just happened recently, or is this something that's been going on longer? Marcus and I exchanged a glance. We talked about how to answer these kinds of questions. We decided on honesty as much as we were comfortable with. It's been complicated, I said. Marcus came to stay with me a few months ago and things between us changed. We didn't act on it immediately, but eventually we did, and now we're trying to figure out what that looks like. And you're happy? Elena asked, looking between us. Very happy, Marcus said immediately. Dan makes me happier than I've ever been. Elena looked at me and I nodded. He does the same for me. She was quiet for a moment and then her face softened. Okay, she said. Okay, I was worried that this was a phase, that Marcus was experimenting or that he'd get scared and disappear back into the closet, but looking at you two, I can see that this is real. This is actually real. It is, I confirmed. Then I'm happy for you, Elena said, and she reached across the table and squeezed both our hands. I want you to know that you have my support, both of you, and if anyone in this family has a problem with it, they can talk to me. We got through the rest of lunch without incident, and when we left, Marcus was crying happy tears. He pulled me aside on the street and just held me for a moment. That could have gone so much worse, he said. But it didn't, I replied. You're allowed to be happy about that. I know, I was so ready for it to be a disaster. Well, it wasn't. You've got a supportive mom, that's pretty incredible. We've got a supportive mom, he corrected, and I liked the sound of that. The hardest part, ultimately, wasn't coming out to Marcus's family, it was coming out to the world. Or more specifically, it was coming out at work. Because as much as the world had supposedly progressed, the thought of showing up at my architectural firm and announcing that I was dating a man came with a specific set of anxieties. My firm wasn't inherently homophobic as far as I knew, but it was also very traditional. A lot of the partners were men in their 60s who'd worked in an era where being gay was something you never ever discussed. There were a few other LGBTQ+ employees, but they were mostly quiet about it. They existed in that subtle space where they weren't quite hiding, but they weren't quite announcing it either. I didn't know if I wanted to exist in that space anymore. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, Marcus said when I brought up my concerns one evening. We were in bed and he was tracing patterns on my chest while we talked. You can take your time, come out when you're ready. But I want to be ready now, I said. I want to stop hiding. I want to bring you to company events and introduce you as my boyfriend, not my best friend. Then do it, he said simply. Tomorrow, tell whoever you trust, let it spread naturally. So I did. I started with Jessica, the colleague who'd noticed I seemed down. I asked her to grab coffee with me before work and then I just said it. I'm dating someone who's been my best friend for 10 years, someone who's a man, and I wanted you to know because I trust you and I think you'll handle it well. Jessica's response was immediate and enthusiastic. She hugged me and told me she was happy for me and she asked if she could meet him at the next company happy hour. By the end of the week, at least half the firm knew. The partners noticed, eventually. My boss, Mr. Harlow, called me into his office and asked me point-blank if I was in a relationship. I said yes. He asked if it was someone I worked with. I said no. He asked if it was something that would affect my job performance. I said absolutely not. He nodded slowly and then he said, "We're a progressive firm, Daniel. I want you to know that. We might be old, but we're not dinosaurs. You're a talented architect and your personal life doesn't change that. If anyone gives you any trouble, you come to me. Understood?" I understood, and honestly, I felt like I could breathe properly for the first time in years. A month after I came out at work, Marcus and I attended a company happy hour together. He came as my date. I introduced him to people as my boyfriend. No one blinked. Life continued. But coming out was just the beginning. Once we'd told the world we were together, we had to actually figure out how to be together in a way that was real and sustainable. Which meant dealing with the fears that neither of us had articulated yet. The first time it came up was during an argument about dishes, literally about dishes. We'd been living together for about 2 months when I got frustrated about the fact that Marcus never rinsed his plates before putting them in the dishwasher. I said something sarcastic about it, and instead of laughing it off like he normally would, he got defensive. "Don't do that," he said sharply. "Don't do what? Ask you to rinse your dishes. Use that tone with me," he said, "like I'm annoying you, like you're already regretting this." I stared at him. "Marcus, I'm not regretting this. You're not rinsing your dishes, those are two separate things." "But that's how it starts," he said, and I could hear the fear underneath his words. "You get annoyed with the little things, then you get annoyed with bigger things, and then you realize that moving in with me was a mistake and that you don't actually want this and—" "Hey," I interrupted, moving toward him. "Hey, look at me." He did reluctantly. "I love you," I said firmly. "Not despite the dishes, not because you rinse them perfectly. I love you, and yes, I'm going to get annoyed with you sometimes, and you're going to get annoyed with me. That's normal, that's what people in relationships do." "How do you know?" he asked. "You've never actually been in a real relationship before." "Neither have you," I pointed out. "We're figuring this out together, but I'm not going anywhere, I promise you that." He was quiet for a moment and then he nodded. "Okay, I'm sorry, I'm scared that I'm going to screw this up. That I'm going to be too much or not enough, or that you're going to realize that being my best friend was one thing but being my boyfriend is completely different." "It's both," I said. "You're my best friend and my boyfriend both at the same time, and yes, maybe I'm occasionally annoyed about the dishes, but I also wake up every morning and I'm grateful that you're in my life, so maybe try to trust that." He did eventually trust it, but that fear, that underlying anxiety that he was too much or that I'd change my mind, it bubbled up occasionally. Sometimes it manifested as arguments about stupid things. Sometimes it manifested as him being clingy. Sometimes it manifested as him withdrawing and becoming distant, testing whether I'd stay. And I did stay every time, because the truth was I was scared too. I was scared that I wasn't enough, that I'd come into this relationship from a place of denial and confusion, and that maybe I was being unfair to Marcus by not being sure from the beginning. I was scared that one day I'd wake up and realize that I'd made a huge mistake. I was scared that coming out at work was just the beginning, and that there would be bigger, scarier coming out conversations to have with people I cared about. But mostly, I was scared that something would take Marcus away from me, that he'd get sick of waiting for me to be sure, or that he'd meet someone who'd understood themselves earlier and was more settled in their identity, that he'd realize there were easier options available. We didn't talk about these fears as explicitly as we should have, but they were there, coloring our interactions, making us hyper-aware of each moment. It took a specific event to make us actually address it head-on. 3 months into our relationship, I got invited to my high school reunion. I hadn't gone to my reunion in years. I barely kept in touch with anyone from high school. but my old friend group had been organizing this one for a while and they kept bugging me to come and eventually I agreed. The night of the reunion, I showed up solo. I didn't think about bringing Marcus. I don't think I made a conscious decision not to bring him, it just didn't occur to me. But as I was walking in and seeing all these people from my past, I suddenly became very aware of the fact that I was introducing myself as Daniel and not as Daniel and my boyfriend Marcus. I was slipping back into my old skin. It was subtle and unconscious, but it happened. I talked about my job, my apartment, my life without mentioning Marcus. When people asked if I was seeing anyone, I vaguely changed the subject. I existed at that reunion as the closeted version of myself, and it felt like betrayal. Marcus called me as I was driving home. "Hey," he said, "how was the reunion?" "Fine," I said, "a little weird seeing people I haven't talked to in 10 years. Did you have a good time?" "Yeah, it was okay." There was a pause. "Did you mention me?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer immediately because the honest answer was no, and he knew the honest answer was no. "You didn't," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Marcus." "It's okay," he said, but his voice said it wasn't okay. "I understand, they're from your old life, you weren't ready to explain." "I just didn't think about it," I said. "I know. But the fact that I didn't think about it was the problem, and we both knew it. Because thinking about Marcus, mentioning Marcus, existing in the world as someone who loved Marcus, that should have been automatic at this point. The fact that it wasn't suggested that somewhere inside, I was still not quite ready to claim this publicly. When I got home, Marcus was asleep on the couch. I carried him to bed. He was heavier asleep, and it always made me laugh, and I lay down next to him. I couldn't sleep though. The next morning, Marcus made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table, and we finally had the conversation we'd been avoiding. "I need to know if you're all in," he said quietly. "Not just in the private version of this, but all in, because I can't keep waiting for you to decide that you're brave enough to love me publicly." "I'm brave enough," I said. "Then why didn't you mention me at your reunion?" "Because I panicked," I admitted. "I saw all these people from my past, people who knew me before I understood who I was, and I defaulted back into that version of myself." Yeah. "And that version of yourself doesn't have a boyfriend." "No," I said, "that version doesn't, but that's not who I am anymore." "Are you sure?" he asked, "because you seem pretty good at being that person when it's convenient." "That's not fair," I said. "I came out at work, I told my family, I introduced you to my colleagues, I'm not hiding." "You're kind of hiding," he said. "Not actively but passively. You're not lying, but you're not exactly volunteering information either. And when I'm not around, or when you're around people from your old life, you just don't mention me, like I'm not an important part of who you are." I wanted to argue with him, but I couldn't because he was right. I was doing exactly what he described. I was existing in a kind of liminal space where I was technically out, but I wasn't really out. I was just present in a way that allowed people to draw their own conclusions. "I'm sorry," I said. "You're right, I'm not being fair to you or to myself, and I don't want to be that person anymore." "Then what are you going to do differently?" he asked. I thought about it. "I'm going to start living like you're my boyfriend, not like you're my secret. I'm going to mention you, I'm going to bring you places, I'm going to hold your hand in public without hesitating, I'm going to make it clear that I love you and I'm not ashamed of that." "Starting when?" "Starting now. Can we go somewhere? I want to take you somewhere public." So we did. We went to brunch at a crowded restaurant in the middle of the day. We sat at a booth and I held his hand across the table. When the waiter asked if we were celebrating anything, I said yes, we were celebrating being us. I didn't explain what that meant and he didn't ask. We ran into my neighbor in the restaurant and I introduced Marcus as my boyfriend. It felt radical and terrifying and like the most honest thing I'd ever done. After that, things shifted. I wasn't suddenly perfect about it. I still had moments of hesitation, instincts to be careful, but I made a conscious effort to exist in the world as part of a couple. It felt like coming home in a whole new way. Chapter 12, The Proposal. A year after we got together, Marcus planned an elaborate proposal. He was very secretive about it. He coordinated with my sister, who I'd come out to about 6 months in and who had been nothing but supportive. He coordinated with Sophia, he coordinated with Alina. Everyone I cared about knew about it except me. It happened on a hiking trail where Marcus and I had taken our first trip as an official couple. We'd gone up there the morning after he told his mother about us, and we'd talked for hours about what we wanted for our future. It had been significant for that reason, and apparently Marcus had remembered that. He proposed at the summit with a ring that his grandmother had given him years ago during a time when she didn't think he'd ever use it. He got down on one knee and I cried and I said yes immediately. "You're sure?" he asked, laughing and crying himself. "You're not going to panic and avoid the wedding planning?" "I'm going to panic throughout the entire wedding planning," I said, "but I'm going to do it while being completely sure that I want to marry you." We got married a year later. It was a small ceremony with close family and friends. My parents were there, surprisingly supportive, and I think that helped Marcus believe that he'd made the right choice in deciding to take a chance on a man who'd been confused about his own sexuality. But the ceremony itself wasn't really the important part. The important part was the decision we'd made to keep choosing each other every single day. Marriage wasn't a fix-all. If anything, it deepened the issues and forced us to confront things we'd been skirting around. We had a big fight about 6 months after the wedding when Marcus's ex-girlfriend showed up. Her name was Charlotte and she dated Marcus about 2 years before we got together. She was lovely and she was in town for business and she wanted to grab coffee with Marcus to catch up. He said yes without thinking about it too much, and when he came back from coffee he mentioned it to me in passing. I immediately felt a spike of jealousy that I wasn't proud of. "You grabbed coffee with Charlotte," I said, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, she was in town. We haven't seen each other in years." "How long were you dating her?" "I don't know, a year maybe." "Why? And you're cool with seeing her, just hanging out like nothing happened?" He looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Yeah, I mean, we didn't end badly. She was just someone I dated before I figured out that I was gay." "So your entire relationship with her was a lie," I said. "Daniel, that's not—" He stopped. "Are you jealous of Charlotte? You realize I was lying to her the entire time we were dating and that I'm in love with you, right?" "I know that. I didn't have a good explanation for what I was feeling. It was complicated and irrational and had nothing to do with Charlotte and everything to do with my own insecurities about being the first thing Marcus was honest about." We fought for a while. It was the worst fight we did since we got together because it wasn't really about Charlotte. It was about the fact that Marcus had history, real history, with people other than me. It was about the fact that some part of me felt like I was owed something for being the first person he loved truthfully, which was a stupid and selfish thing to feel, but I felt it anyway. Eventually, we worked it out. Marcus helped me understand that his past didn't negate what we had, and I worked on my jealousy and my insecurity and my fear that I somehow wasn't enough. This became a pattern over the next few years. We'd have an issue, we'd fight about it, we'd work through it, we'd get stronger each time. We weren't perfect, but we were learning how to be a team, how to fight and argue and still come out the other side with our love intact. By year 5 of our relationship, we were different people than we'd been when we got together. Marcus had advanced at his job and was now heading up the marketing department. He was confident in a way he hadn't been before, and he moved through the world like someone who belonged. He was still funny and kind and occasionally annoying about dishes, but he was also more settled, more sure of himself. I'd changed too. I'd come out more fully at work and I'd started taking on more high-profile projects. My sexuality was just a fact of my life now, not something I had to carefully manage. I was happier, calmer, more confident in my own skin. We'd bought a house together, which was a huge step. It was a fixer-upper that we'd fixed up together, learning as we went. We'd painted walls and installed new flooring and argued about paint colors and compromised on everything. It was the most domestic thing we could have done, and it felt important. One evening, sitting on our porch with glasses of wine, I said, "Thank you." "For what?" Marcus asked. "For being brave enough to tell me you were gay, for giving me the space to figure out who I was, for staying even when I was being an idiot." He took my hand. "Thank you for eventually catching up, for choosing me even when it was scary, for becoming the person you always had the potential to be." "I love you," I said. "I love you too," he replied, "every single day." Years later, people would sometimes ask me about the moment I fell in love with Marcus. They'd want to pinpoint it, to find the exact second when everything changed. The truth is, I can't. There was no single moment. It was a series of moments strung together like pearls on a string. It was Marcus at my door in the rain. It was waking up with his arm around me. It was that conversation at 3 in the morning where he told me he was gay. It was the fight about dishes. It was the reunion where I realized I couldn't hide. It was 1,000 small moments where I chose him, and he chose me over and over again. If I had to pick one moment, though, it would be this. I'm sitting at our kitchen table and Marcus is making breakfast. He's singing off-key to a song on the radio, and he's moving around the kitchen with the kind of ease that comes from living somewhere for a long time, from belonging to someone, from being loved completely and without reservation. He turns to me and he smiles, and that smile is just for me. It's the smile of someone who chose to stay, who chose to fight, who chose to build a life with me despite the fears and doubts and complications. That's the moment I'm grateful for. That's the moment I knew that everything had been worth it. I can't believe it's been 10 years, Marcus said, looking at the old photo of us from college. We were sitting in our office, yes. We now owned an architectural firm together, which was its own story, and we were going through old pictures for a presentation we were giving on our journey as business partners and life partners. 10 years since what? I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. Since you let me sleep in your room that first night, since everything changed. Actually, I said, pulling up a different photo, it's been almost 11 years since that night, 12 years since we started dating, and somehow, impossibly, you still won't rinse your dishes before putting them in the dishwasher. He laughed. You're going to harp on that forever, aren't you? Absolutely, it's my conjugal right. We were in our 30s now, we were established, we had a house that was fully renovated, we had a business together, we had taken a trip to Paris where he'd cried in front of the Notre Dame. We'd attended pride parades and volunteered for LGBTQ plus youth organizations. We'd started a tradition of going back to that hiking trail every year on our anniversary. We were also planning to adopt, something we'd been discussing seriously for the past year. There were kids out there who needed homes, who needed parents who loved them. We thought we might be able to be those parents. Do you regret it? Marcus asked suddenly. Any of it? Not a single second, I said. You. Not one, he confirmed, even when you were being an emotional coward. Especially then, because it meant I got to fall in love with you slowly. I got to choose you multiple times instead of just having it happen. He leaned over and kissed me, and it was the kind of kiss that had years of love and trust and compromise behind it. It was the kind of kiss that felt like forever. I love you, he said against my lips. I love you too, always. If you've read this far, you might be wondering what the point is. And here's the thing about love stories, especially queer love stories, they're not really about the moment when everything clicks into place. They're about the moments in between. They're about the courage it takes to admit who you are, both to yourself and to other people. They're about learning that love isn't always simple, and sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who challenge you the hardest. They're about choosing every single day to stay, to fight, to build something real and lasting even when it's hard. They're about understanding that your past doesn't define you, but your present choices do. They're about the radical act of being honest, both with yourself and with the people you care about. They're about learning that safety and comfort and routine can be beautiful things when they're shared with someone you love. They're about understanding that coming out isn't a single event, it's a series of choices made over and over again in small and large ways. They're about finding home not in a place but in a person, and then, eventually, building that home together into something real and solid and permanent. This story was written with the intention of showing a realistic representation of a queer relationship. There are no dramatic reveals, no tragic endings, no issues that need to be solved by the power of heterosexual friendship or love. What there is, two men who are scared and confused and in love, two men who make mistakes and have to apologize, two men who have to actively choose each other multiple times, sometimes in small ways and sometimes in big ways. The journey from best friends to lovers is complex and messy and filled with uncertainty, but it's also beautiful, and it's worth telling, and it's worth celebrating. If you're reading this and you're questioning your sexuality, or you're out and you're navigating a relationship, or you're scared that the person you love might not feel the same way, I want you to know that you're not alone, and that your story matters. and that there are people out there who will choose you over and over again, just like Marcus chose Daniel, and just like Daniel eventually chose Marcus back. The world needs more queer love stories. The world needs to see that we exist, that we love, that we build lives and families and futures together. This is our story, this is our truth, and we're grateful to share it with you.